Good morning, and welcome to the Ethanol Producer Magazine webinar series. My name is Lisa Gibson. I'm the editor of Ethanol Producer Magazine, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar, titled Creating a High Performance Culture, and sponsored by Keiko Isom. Before we start, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Keiko Isom is a national business advisory firm and a top 100 accounting firm that has been deeply rooted in cultivating businesses in the food and agriculture industry since 1932. Since then, Keiko has vastly expanded its footprint with a span of offices situated from coast to coast. It has also increased its service capabilities and expertise in order to meet the changing needs of its clients along the way. From sustainability, federal affairs, and land conservation to financial strategies, succession planning, and human resources, businesses call on Keiko strategists to help with the issues that matter most to them. Through the expertise gained from working with companies in agriculture, ethanol production, and manufacturing, Keiko offers a wealth of knowledge for biofuel companies in particular. Proactive ideas that not only change the way you do business, but add value to your bottom line. Steve Jobs once said, "It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. Hire smart people so they can tell us what to do." The power of these words often gets overlooked when businesses hire external advisors. If your advisors aren't experts in your market, if they don't partner with you and offer solutions to alleviate the stress of market volatility and industry challenges, and if they don't proactively find ways to bring value to your business without you asking them for it, then you may need to look for a better business advisor. Feeling the sting of the tight labor market? Looking to protect your own smart people from being poached by competitors? Seeking greater profitability and resilience in times of tight margins? Discover how Keiko Isom has become a reliable, proactive partner with biofuel producers across the nation to address these challenges. Their experts provide value greater than numbers alone.
A big thank you to Keiko Isom for sponsoring today. I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to find that at ethanolproducer.com. Select webinars under the events tab and check for that in the next week or so. Also, we will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar after all presenters are finished. Feel free to type your questions in the appropriate box on your screen at any time during today's webinar, and any questions we don't get to in the allotted time will be forwarded to the presenters after the webinar, along with the contact information of the attendees who asked them. And with that, I think we're ready to begin. We have three speakers today: Danielle McCormick, Principal of Keiko People; Bart Nichols, Talent Advisor with Keiko People; and Vicki Nicometto, a Talent Advisor with Keiko People. Danielle, whenever you're ready, go ahead and begin.
That's great. I appreciate it. So as this slide comes up with this quote that I love so much from Stephen Covey, I think it's a great way to start our time together today, which is that you're perfectly aligned to get the results that you're currently getting. And anywhere we have a consistent result, whether it be a positive result or a challenging result, congratulations, that's happening because you have a great process and system to get you there. And as we think about creating a high performance culture, particularly as we think about the clients that we serve and that we partner with within the ethanol and biofuel space, that's what we're focusing on over and over again, is really what successful systems you're putting in place in order to get you a really consistent positive result. You know, for many of you on the webinar today, struggle with finding great talent and retention, where others are really trying to maximize great talent that you already have, because one of the challenges you might have is actually low turnover, but then how do I really maximize the productivity of the individuals who are here and who have many of times been there for many, many years. Both good problems to have in some ways, however, very real challenges as we're working with, our HR partners and certainly, leaders within the industry. And so our approach is really to introduce a comprehensive approach to talent development and human resources. Keiko People is the HR and talent development consulting arm of Keiko ISOM, and that's what we do and that's what we specialize in. And our approach is really to ensure that your people-related systems are going to be a balance where culture is going to meet compliance. And so that all of your HR systems are first and foremost going to be in alignment with the goals. What are your, not necessarily people goals, but your organizational strategy and goals. And then from that, we are going to then take a look at a talent scan. And we recommend that you do that on a regular basis. Do you look at the talent that you have? Do you have the right people in the right roles? It can also be just a health checkup of your overall HR processes that we help with. We provide some support with integration and recruitment, that onboarding experience that's so critical and really just helping to find talent. Obviously, the HR administration, the regulatory compliance piece. And I would say most of our clients within this industry do a pretty darn good job when it comes to this. What we find, though, is because the regulatory challenges take up so much time, it can be really challenging to be able to invest in the other side of the wheel, which kicks off with the talent development portion, your training, your coaching programs, what's happening with your performance management systems. Again, we're going to spend some time talking about that today. And then, of course, really looking at strategic retention. What are we doing in order to develop that bench of talent that's going to be coming up next? One of our clients I was with just a couple of weeks ago, there was a plant supervisor who they knew was going to be retiring, but they thought they had another 3 or 4 years. And he announced he wanted to retire in 3 or 4 months and really hadn't done much work because they thought they had more time. We really want to help individuals to make sure that you're really deepening that bench of talent so that when turnover takes place, really the wheels can keep on turning without too much disruption. And so one of the most common questions we get is really about retention, and why employees leave. And the biggest assumption is that it's simply about pay. And so while none of us are volunteering for our jobs necessarily, and compensation matters, what I will tell you with all certainty is the primary reason people leave is really not just pay. People know how much they're making when they accept a position for you. It becomes not enough when it's not enough potentially to deal with you as the leader or whatever stress or headache it is that's taking place in the culture of the organization. And so the 3 primary reasons that people leave are poor leadership. They leave managers, not companies. They quit bosses. And so really ensuring that you're investing into successful leadership practices. Compensation matters, there's no doubt about that. And a lot of the work that we do when we're doing compensation studies for the plants we work with is that we're not just looking at competitive plants, because most people aren't leaving necessarily to go to another plant because of the geographic nature of what you all do, but instead they're looking to leave for high-paying competitors in different industries. And so we like to do a lot of analysis on what is the competitive landscape around you so that you can make sure that your overall compensation package to include benefits, time off, obviously salary is going to be in alignment. And then most importantly is really that we're looking at your culture. I love this quote here from Peter Drucker that says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." While strategy is important and we spend a lot of time helping people to set a solid strategy, it's only as good as the culture that's going to support it. And so what we want to do is spend time today really talking about the 3 key areas that are going to be most significant to you when it comes to creating that high performance culture. So we're going to talk about training and coaching. We're going to talk about building successful feedback systems. And we're going to talk about some progressive talent development offerings that are a little bit different and unique. But what's critical and foundational to any of these three components is really going to be effective communication. And when we look at this quote, I know you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. I don't know if any of you feel this way. I'm the mother of 2 teenage daughters, so in some ways I feel this way every day, which is a little concerning considering I'm a professional communicator. But the reason for this, the reason that so many of us feel this way, is because of just challenges in communication. And solid communication is going to be at the foundation of any successful culture. And so at the slide in front of you, it's really just a simple model of one person communicating with another. So we have person A on the left and person B on the right. And our goal in communication, of course, that our intended message is the one that's received, right? But as we know, far too often, that's not what happens. And the reason for that are all of the different types of noise that get in the way. And the stars and lightning in the center of the model represents those noise. And there's 3 primary types of noise that are the biggest challenges, that cause the greatest challenges in effective communication, where again, that intended message is received the way it was intended to be delivered. And the first of which is just physical noise, right? So a loud work area or a poor connection if you're on a phone. It could be an accent or a foreign language that's being used. Internal jargon is another one. I mean, I just think about some of the acronyms and language that we use in such a technical industry, and how confusing it can be. I was reminded not long ago about a really simple example of that, where my daughter, when she was younger, was playing couch commando with the remote, and my husband wanted to watch a basketball game. We live in northern Colorado, so we're Nuggets fans, and so he says, Lauren, can come sit with me and watch the Nuggets game? And to her response is, I don't want to watch some chicken show, right? I mean, and so even though it's a very elementary example, the truth is, in her little mind, the only nugget would be a chicken nugget, as opposed to a basketball team. And so we use that internal jargon that can really cause challenges in people understanding what you mean. Biological noise is the second type of noise that can get in the way. That's really how we're feeling physically. Do we have a headache? Are we not feeling well? Are we tired? Are we sick? That absolutely can cause a barrier, not only in delivering messages effectively, but also in receiving of them. And then the third is what we call psychological noise. How do we feel about ourselves with the person who we're communicating with? Are we intimidated by them? Is it a person maybe that we've had previous conflict with in the past? And so when we think about those scenarios, all of us, we have that person who just irks us and rubs us the wrong way. When they come to us, sometimes we're not always listening for their intention and their intended message, and we might be delivering a message a little differently than we would if we hadn't had that previous experience. It's important that we're just familiar and aware of all of these different types of noise, because this is what causes us to get into that back and forth to where so-and-so said this, and person says, I didn't say that, I said this, and we get into that endless cycle. And a big contributor to that is the method that we use to communicate. And so those arrows along the top and the bottom are going to represent those methods. And so, we use our voice, phone, face-to-face, obviously email and text message. Most of us have gotten, as much as we're embarrassed to admit it, into some sort of an argument over email or text message, probably with someone significant to us in our lives. And the reason for that is that, only 7% of communication is the words that we actually use, the words that come out of our mouths. And so when we're using written communication, we're missing 93% of the delivery of the message, because we can't hear tone of voice or inflection or see someone's body language. So it's so easy for us to get it wrong. And while written communication, without a doubt, is more efficient, I would say that the loss in time that we experience sometimes trying to dig ourselves out of the challenges that we create by trying to be efficient is ultimately a time loss. So be intentional about that. And these good communication techniques are foundational but critical as we look at building a high performance culture and how we're going to address what I call performance gaps. And so it's not uncommon for us to receive questions from clients regularly about, that an employee is really struggling, or we need to get to the point where we might be needing to move toward termination, for example, that there have been issues where we've invested so much time and energy into recruiting this role, but far too often we're willing to dismiss them far too quickly. And so when we're looking at managing performance gaps, the first thing I really challenge any of our clients to do is to really commit to digging into why the performance gap exists. Certainly it happens where there's an issue of a mishire. I mean, that happens. But often when we look, especially in high turnover roles, I would want to dig into your recruiting practices and look at that more closely, and have clear expectations been set. Are we telling our new employees and existing employees what good looks like? And then are we providing the training and coaching and support in order to help them to get there? And then third, really identifying, is this an issue of attitude or aptitude? Now, if this is a short-term employee and you're seeing concerns about attitude, part ways right away. It will not get any better than what you see in the first 90 days. That's when they're still trying to impress you. So if you've got concerns about attitude, I would redirect them to a career choice somewhere else as quickly as possible. But if it's an issue of aptitude, but you can really see that, gosh, this person has the right stuff, that they've got the right attitude, they seem to have the right heart, then really digging in a little bit deeper to your training practices. Is there a different trainer that can work with them? Is there a different process that we need to use? Is probably worth the investment of time, because you can't teach attitude, right? People either have it or they don't, and that in the long term is going to absolutely dramatically impact the positive culture that you're working to create. So as we're starting to think about this first option, this first component of creating a high performance culture, of training and coaching being critical to that, Vicki Nicometto is going to tell us a little bit about some of the tools and practices that we like to bring pretty regularly. Vicki, what do you have to say?
Thanks, Danielle. So first up, we'll talk about training, and we're going to talk about different types of training, specifically knowledge and skills, or hard skills training. And then we're also going to talk about what we call success skills. And I want to make sure we differentiate between these two types of training for you. So when we think about the required skills to do the job, the actual nuts and bolts of how to do that job, that's the knowledge and skills, what we call hard skills. The other type of training we think about that's often referred to as soft skills, but we here at Keiko people prefer to call success skills, and I'll tell you more about that. Those are the two types of training we're going to look at. And I just want to highlight for you here again, too, that as Danielle mentioned, performance issues are often an indication that the employee didn't get the proper training to do his or her job effectively. So as we're thinking about these two different kinds of training, I want to give you another way to think about them. So if you look on this slide here, you'll see the tip of the iceberg that's above the water. We've got that part labeled domain competencies. Those domain competencies are the hard skills. Again, the skills we see the employee using every day on the job. Below the surface, though, where you see the bulk of the iceberg, we call that the enabling competencies. Those are the success skills that you don't necessarily see playing out every day, but the underlying supporting skills needed for success in the role, hence the term we use, success skills. So let me bring this to real life for you, make it make sense. Let's say that we're talking about a maintenance manager at a typical plant. This maintenance manager needs to be able to create maintenance plans that allow the plant to stay up and running, and he'd need some solid troubleshooting skills. Those are a couple of what we would call the domain competencies, or the hard skills. But in addition to those skills, he has to have some critical thinking skills to be able to factor in all the variables and downstream effects of that maintenance plan. And then he has to be able to communicate at all levels of the organization, as well as potentially with external vendors. So he has to know how to tailor his message to his audience as well. So those critical thinking skills and those communication skills, those are the examples of enabling competencies or success skills. You don't necessarily see them, you can't point to them, but you know that they're necessary to do the job well. And so if an employee is not performing, he or she could be missing some key skills, either domain or enabling. Oftentimes in our work as HR consultants, we see organizations investing in training on the domain competencies, those hard skills. But then they often don't invest in the supporting skills or the success skills that will enable the employee to do his or her best work. And without those, employees can struggle and ultimately fail. We've probably all heard stories about people who had great technical skills, but their people skills were so bad that they left a trail of scorched earth and dead bodies behind them that ultimately led to their failure or being fired. the very best organizations invest in both type of training for their employees. These are the organizations that have high performance cultures and strong employee loyalty. That employee loyalty is created when employees feel that the plant or the organization values them enough to invest in their continued training and growth. Now, one of the arguments we hear often is that budget and time can be a barrier to getting both types of training. One creative approach that we've seen work is to address those challenges of budget and time is to use the time that you have maybe for what are called lineup meetings or huddles or pre-shift meetings, something of that sort, to do short bursts of training during those times. So if you did 10 minutes of that type of training every day, at the end of a year, it would equal 40 hours of training for full-time employees. That can have an impact. Danielle, would you share some examples of the types of training that we've been up to with clients recently?
Yeah, and I think there's a few ethanol plants we've been doing some work with on that success skills training. And as you were talking, it really reminded me that for most of these organizations, they're already really high performance cultures. They know they need to continue to invest in this arena. So it's not that there's a fire to put out necessarily, but instead, how can they strengthen teams? And one of them here in Colorado that we've done some work with, we use a behavioral tool called DISC. Some of you might be familiar with it, that we did with their leadership team to really increase their communication skills and to understand maybe why someone communicates the way that they are. We've done some work on how to deliver more effective feedback. We've done a lot of work on coaching and how to coach for performance improvement and how to deliver more effective performance appraisals. Even just this last week, it was such a compliment. I think early on, this particular leader of the plant said, I don't know how they're going to respond to this. And this is now probably the third time I've spent a half a day or so in training with them. And one of the participants, who's one of their maintenance supervisors, has just said, so Danielle, what are you coming back with next? At this point, there's this appetite for it. And so even though at first it seemed like we didn't have time to do it, now when it's done in a fun way, it really does allow people to come together and build their relationships. So lots of fun stuff. We have a whole course catalog of content areas available on our website if anybody's interested, or they can reach out to myself, Bart, or Vicki to learn more about those. But I think whether it's through us or something that you're creating on your own, investing in that regular success skills development is going to make a huge difference. You're absolutely going to see the return on investment.
Thanks, Danielle. So we've talked about a little bit about training, and while training is absolutely critical in creating a high performance culture, effective coaching is what I would call the secret sauce that can take a mediocre organization and turn it into a world-class organization. Excuse me just a moment. Sorry about that. We've been having all the rains that everybody's been getting here in Kansas City, and allergies are acting up, so excuse me. So going back to coaching, when most people think of the word coach, they think of sports coaches, but the origin of the word actually comes from stagecoach, which is intended to get someone from where they are to where they need to go. And actually, both of these analogies come into play in coaching employees. So we're going to talk now about how the supervisor can act as a coach, and then I'm going to share some coaching tools with you as well. So going back to that sports analogy, think about a coach running alongside their player, giving them pointers, directing the player's attention to their form or how they need to make adjustments. That coaching is all done in an attempt to help the athlete improve on his or her performance. Now, many supervisors have a hard time playing this type of coach role, especially when they need to deliver corrective or constructive feedback. But remember that delivering that corrective feedback is what helps your people perform better, just like it helps an athlete perform better. So for example, I have a couple of clients who are siblings in a family business. They're both up and comers. They're the next generation of leadership for that business. One of them, the daughter, is very comfortable sharing feedback, but her brother really struggles with it, especially when he thinks he has to deliver bad news. The trick for him is to stop thinking of it as bad news and instead think of it as helping your employee to improve their performance, just as a coach would help his or her athlete to improve their performance. The stagecoach analogy is a great way to think about how you help develop employees who want to grow and reach their career goals. And we're going to share some really simple and effective coaching tools up next to help supervisors be better at both types of coaching, both types of types of both coaching conversations. Excuse me. So we're going to take a look now at these feedback systems. And first, we're going to look at the first type that we're going to look at is when you have an employee that you have to help them improve their performance in some way, or they have a performance issue. This is that sports coach analogy. Now, an important key in this type of feedback is that the feedback be both accurate and timely, because just like in a marriage, we don't want our spouse to bring up an issue from 6 months ago that he or she was unhappy with. Our employees want to know in the moment when they're having a performance issue, and they need that feedback as quickly after the issue as possible, while it's still fresh in their minds. So the first model we're going to look at here is just simply called the SBI model. It's a great, simple tool for delivering constructive feedback after a dropped ball or a poor performance. So in this model, a supervisor would speak to the employee and share the situation and the behavior that she observed. She'd then describe the impact of that behavior and then ask the employee for some input. Afterward, she'd want to remind the employee of the expectations going forward. Now, remember, a key point here is to be sure to deliver this feedback privately. Remember, praise in public, correct in private. I'm actually going to demonstrate this model with you with my friend Bart here acting in the role of the employee. So, Bart, thanks for meeting with me.
Oh, no problem.
I noticed this morning that you came in at 8:25. Our expected start time is 8 o'clock. And because you were late, the impact of that was that Joe couldn't leave at his regular time, so he was late picking up his children from daycare. And so I need to understand here, what happened this morning?
Well, I do apologize for that. I'm just not a good morning person, and I overslept my alarm again.
I appreciate you sharing that with me. I want to remind you that the expectation is that you're here at 8 a.m. so that we don't cause problems for others as well. So please be sure to be on time from now on.
I will do that.
So it's just that simple. Thanks, Bart. So it's just that simple. It really is a very simple way to deliver feedback. No drama, and it just gets right to the situation, behavior, and impact. Now notice there was no, you always do this. There's none of that kind of talk. It was about a specific situation, a specific behavior, and a specific impact. Interestingly enough, I know we're talking about using this in a corrective situation, but you can also use it in a positive situation when somebody does something great. So Bart and I will demonstrate that again. Hey, Bart, thanks for meeting with me. I just wanted to share with you that I noticed that yesterday when Joe was struggling to get all of his work done on time, you stepped in and helped out. And that was fantastic because everything kept running smoothly. All the work got done on time. I just wanted you to know we really appreciated that.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that because I remember how tough it was for me when I first started, and someone did that for me. So I thought it'd be good to pay it forward.
Great. Thank you. Keep it up. So you notice it's the same thing. I described the situation, I noted the behavior I saw, and I told him about the positive impact. It's exactly the same model, but you can use it either for correcting behavior that's not been great or praising behavior that has been really great. So the next model we're going to talk about is just simply start, stop, continue. Again, super simple model, but really effective. You can use this model with a team or with an individual. So if you have your team gathered together, this is one that I like to use when I'm facilitating teamwork. I'll ask the team, okay, what are you doing well that you need to continue? What are you doing that you could stop doing that just really isn't adding value anymore? And what do you all need to start doing to take your team to the next level? Getting the team talking and brainstorming can be fantastic. But this also works really well when you're holding regular one-on-ones with the people that you supervise. So you might share with them or ask them first what they think they should start, stop, and continue, and then you might share your insights as well. Some really simple but effective models to help with delivering constructive feedback. And you can see you can use them in a variety of situations. Our next model is really great to use when you have an employee who has recently completed a project. It's a 4-step model, and it can provide some great insight into how your employee is thinking or feeling about his or her own performance. And it can help you both in closing performance gaps and or helping the employee to reach his or her goal. So you can use it a couple of ways, just like the other models you can use in a couple of ways. I'll walk you through each of the 4 steps. So the first step is simply to ask for permission. And you can see here on the slide a way in which you might do that. You might say, I have some feedback that I think would be useful for you. Would you like it? Really simple. The next step is, and I love that we call this emptying the performer's cup, but this is where you want to hear from the employee and give her a chance to tell you how she felt about it. This is where you can really gain a lot of insight into how the employee is thinking and feeling about what just happened. So you might say something like what we see on the slide here. So that I don't tell you things you already know, tell me what worked. And I would say pause after each of these questions and let the employee answer just that part of it. So what worked? And then after he or she has answered, you will ask the next one. So where did you get stuck or where did you struggle? And let them answer that piece. And then what would you do differently next time? So give them a chance to answer each of those individually. For the third part, this is where you get their agreement again to share your observations. So we're going to talk more specifically about endorsing what you agree with, et cetera. But then you might say, so would you like to hear my observations? And this is where you're going to go through in step 4, building on what the performer said. So what worked? Share with them where they were successful. Tell them where you agreed with where they succeeded. Where did you get stuck? Give them some insight from your perspective on what looks like it came off the rails or didn't work quite right for them. And then finally, when you've asked them what would you do differently, maybe you can then share some ideas about how they could do something differently as well. Again, another simple model. This one simply 4 steps. This next model we call the GROW model, and GROW is just an acronym for the words you see here: goal, reality, options, way forward. This one really suits that stagecoach analogy. It's great for using when you have an employee that wants to grow and develop and achieve some professional goals, but it's also great to use when you have an employee that has a challenge that he or she is trying to work through. Part of the beauty of this particular coaching model is that we're not prescribing. We're not telling the employee what to do. What we're really doing here is handing the responsibility for the growth or the problem solving back to the employee to help him or her think through how to get there. And fortunately for us today, we have somebody who is willing to volunteer to be coached live in the webinar, which I think is super brave. So Kenny, are you on the line?
Yes, good morning. I'm here.
Hi, Kenny. Do you want to take a quick second to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kenny Wirtz. I'm the plant manager here at Commonwealth Agri-Energy in Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Thanks. Thank you again for being willing to volunteer. So you all know Kenny and I did not rehearse this, so I don't really know what problem he's going to throw at me. And we're just going to go ahead and coach live and see how it goes. So we're going to start first with that G of the GROW model. And this is where we start with the goal. So Kenny, thanks so much for meeting with me today. What do you hope to get from our conversation or from this discussion?
We've done a pretty good job of hiring and retaining employees. Now we need to step them up into more of a leadership role, as they advance in their career, get them into a middle manager role and get them prepared to take the next step up into management.
Great. Tell me, why is this important to you now?
We had a little bit of turnover in the last 2.5 years. We've got a group of early career guys, 10 years or less, and I've got 4 or 5 of them. I'm trying to evaluate how to get them progressing up through the ranks. Which guy has skills that you can improve on, which guy has leadership skills, which guy has mechanical knowledge, just how you can get everybody on an even playing field so that they're motivated to keep progressing.
Great. What are the consequences if you don't reach this goal?
Well, if I pass up a guy, he's going to wind up going to work up the street at the company that hired the guys that just left me.
Great. Fantastic. So let's talk about where you are right now. It sounds like you're thinking about how to move this forward. So what's been happening so far, or what have you tried so far?
Yeah, mentoring. Mentoring's been the top, actually spending time with the guys and evaluating their strengths and weaknesses, trying to build on their weaknesses.
Okay. And what have been your results doing that?
One particular
Sorry,
example is a younger guy that's moved up into a lead op role, which I would consider middle manager. Not a real strong leadership guy, but a very thorough knowledge of operations and how stuff's supposed to work. And so, been trying to spend more time with him, empowering him to make decisions, and then backing him up, making sure he sees them through.
Terrific. And what have been the results of doing that? What have you seen?
Somewhat a mixed bag. You know, when he's back him up, he displays leadership skills, loses confidence when he doesn't have that constant backing, though.
Okay. What do you sense are the obstacles there?
You know, honestly, it's he's just a younger fella, like say less than high school, and he's trying to find his way. He's looking for direction. He's looking for instruction.
Okay. Okay. So given that, it sounds like a maturity level. Is the goal still realistic here?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at right. Said we've got other guys that have strengths in different areas, but he's definitely a quality employee. He's definitely somebody we want to retain in 10 years. I'm absolutely certain he's going to be a great employee for somebody, and I'd like for it to be us. But you know, if it's not us, at least we're still developing him while he's here. He's going to be a contributor.
That's great. So let's take a look then at some options for you. So if you could have this go any way you want, like what would be your ideal scenario?
Like I say, just watching him progress over the years so that you have confidence in him making the right decisions nights, weekends when we're not here to back him up.
Okay. So if you were him, what would you have to see or hear to get your attention and to get you moving in that direction?
If I was in his position, I probably need to point out to him more often that we really do rely on him. Instead, slowly take off the training wheels. We rely on you. We depend on you. We're comfortable with your decision-making process. Now it's time for you to be self-empowered and start making these decisions on your own, and then report back to me. You know, if you're having problems, let me know immediately. But we trust you're making good decisions. Just let us know how it's turning out and how we can assist you.
Great. Now I'm going to ask you to do something that may seem a little unusual at first. I'm going to ask you to kind of step out of yourself and pretend that you're an observer of the conversation between you and I that we've just had. If you were watching this conversation we've just had as an observer, what would you recommend to Kenny?
Not as an observer of this, and in general, sometimes I have a tendency to micromanage. Absolutely, I'm probably playing a role in too much oversight for him.
Okay.
I've got to balance.
So,
I've got to balance my expectations a little bit more. You know, with a bias towards he's a young guy finding his way. This bad decision isn't the end of the world. You know, he's made 10 good decisions, and this one he just needed a little clarification on.
Yeah, great. So do any of those things, those ideas you've talked about, taking off the training wheels, micromanaging a little less, do any of those ideas interest you enough to explore them further?
Oh, absolutely.
Fantastic. And if you were to do that, how might you go about it?
Like I say, started out with just a conversation with him to reinforce that I absolutely believe he's capable of doing everything that's expected of him, and asking him how I can start taking off some of the pressure and letting him handle things independently.
Great. So talking about the way forward now, does that option interest you enough to take action on it?
Oh, absolutely.
Good. I heard you talk about how you'd go about it. What do you think might be a barrier? What might get in the way of that?
I'm afraid too much too soon will run him off. Like I said, there's there's a lot of industry that's booming around here. Every one of these guys have a chance to go somewhere and do something that's something different if they're not comfortable with the situation. So I'm not saying I'm held hostage on it, but definitely a fear of the younger mindset of there's something bigger and better out there for me anyway.
How might you overcome that barrier?
Well, it's always incentivizing the crews, incentivizing the guys, and keeping this place competitive. And honestly, it's getting them to buy in. It's the mentorship and the leadership, making them buy into what we're doing so that they think they're part of a well-run facility.
So what is the next step you'd need to take to make that happen, and when will you take it?
Yeah, probably later on this week. He is on shift work. Probably the next time he comes in, sit down, tell him what we've discussed here, and with his input, chart a path forward.
That's fantastic. All right, ladies and gentlemen on the phone, I know that we won't be able to hear you, but please, everybody applaud Kenny for his bravery for being coached live here today. Thank you, Kenny. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you again. I just want to point out a couple of things from that. So back in that G, when we were talking about the goal, and I'm going to try to get us back there, I want you to note that I asked him some questions about why it's important and what would happen if he didn't move forward. The reason that we do that is we want to get their buy-in to, yeah, this is really important. Or if it's not important, why are we even talking about it, right? But if yeah, this is important and I do need to take action on this, you start getting their commitment then to move forward. In the reality, we're talking about, okay, what have we done here? What can we do? And here in options, we talk about what can we do? And this part about the way forward, this is where we're getting them to commit to their next steps. What are you going to do? When are you going to do it? Notice I didn't do any problem solving for him. It was Kenny's problem. I just asked him the questions to get his mind thinking about how he might solve that problem for himself. That's really true coaching and the type of coaching we do every day. And it's very, very powerful when used with the right individuals and on the right questions and getting their buy-in.
Hey,
so,
Vicki,
Yep.
One quick thought for Kenny that I thought was just so perfect in this example is, you know, he was talking about how what he's trying to do is take people to the next level. And using a tool like this, you don't have to be a professional coach. Anyone on this call can use this method. And when we're trying to develop that next level of leaders, the hardest part about that is really refining those critical thinking skills. As Vicki said earlier, we do a good job of teaching people what to do. We don't do a great job of teaching people how to think. And so it seems like it's kind for us to give people the answers when they're struggling with something. But what we're really doing is teaching them to keep coming to us. And then we wonder why they're stunted and they can't do critical thinking. So using this method and this model, and anybody who wants it, obviously we can send out the slides to anyone or an easy handout to be able to use, but it's huge in developing that next generation of talent of just using this every time they come to you with a challenge. Now, Vicki didn't give the answer to the question that said, would you like some suggestions from me? That's in the model. And we did that intentionally for this scenario because we knew Kenny had it. But sometimes they do need a little bit of guidance or support, but most of the time they know they just need the validation of the idea that they have is really the right one. Great job, both of you.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks for that added, I think, insight. I think it's very useful. Thank you. Next up, we're going to talk about progressive talent development, and I am going to hand the baton to Bart, who's going to tell you all about it.
All right. Thanks so much, Vicki. Good morning, everybody. So as we think about talent development, I want to cover these three areas of trashing your performance evaluation, the shift toward talent development discussions, and within those discussions, the power of well-crafted questions. So I want you to think back to our time together in the beginning of our time this morning when Danielle shared the quote from Stephen Covey. You're perfectly aligned to get the results you're currently getting. If you want more from those results, you have to be aggressive. And being aggressive means being progressive when it comes to talent development. And what I mean by that is being involved and having a developed process that gets your people excited about how they perform and grow in their roles with your plant and with their own careers. So talent development differs greatly from the traditional review process in who drives the conversation and the frequency of those conversations. It's really an ongoing relationship that occurs between the employee, the supervisor, and your plant, with the goal of aligning all of those goals that the employee has in their role with their career and with the plant's strategic roadmap. The biggest difference in talent development discussions as opposed to performance evaluations is that the employee drives the talent development discussion, and it's formed by the relationship that they have with their supervisor, and it's supported by regular coaching from that supervisor. So annual reviews are then replaced with more frequent talent development meetings, and they serve as a deep dive into activities and goals of the employee and how those align with your plant's goals. Topics are based on discussions already in progress. So what this does, it reduces any surprises that might catch the employee off balance in the meeting. They create ownership and participation from all those involved, and the focus is on the employee and how they are overall part of the success of your plant. So as part of the talent development process, feedback is essential, and it helps create and further conversations between the employee and the supervisor. The greatest challenge with feedback systems is that we ask too many questions. The evaluator oftentimes is left spending a lot of time completing long surveys that often don't get at the heart of what matters the most. So it's critical that employees know where they stand, and both positive and constructive feedback provides information needed for further successful development in your organization. Timely feedback also minimizes, again, any surprises that occur in the talent development meeting. So it's pretty simple. Vicki shared this earlier. Feedback should focus on the simple question of what should I stop, start, and continue doing. This allows focus on the task at hand, and these questions work on a project-by-project basis or in an overall performance approach. So let's take a deeper look into the differences between talent development meetings and reviews. Think back to your last talent development period. Did you, as an employee, walk away from the experience feeling energized for what lies ahead? Sadly, most performance evaluation systems are intended to celebrate great performance. However, they leave the supervisor feeling anxious about what's being conveyed, and the employee is left feeling disappointed even after a great evaluation. And much of this is, again, because it's a system that's outdated and been used for decades, and it's focused on a rating system. These traditional evaluations that include rating-based competencies force the employee to be in the mindset of just confirming to their supervisor and to their plant whether or not they're good at what they do. They're looking to see where they fall on the sliding scale of 1 to 5, or do they exceed your expectations? The challenge often is, even if they receive a rating of 4, which is a solid performer, most employees get left feeling disappointed that they didn't earn the 5 because they thought they should have. And oftentimes, these ratings are tied to compensation. It's not that it's bad to lay out what employees are doing well and where they can improve. However, there's a different way to accomplish that same objective. Additionally, many supervisors spend hours preparing documentation, but struggle to have a truly meaningful discussion from that. An employee-driven talent development meeting that includes feedback is a real successful way to keep your people engaged and growing within your plant. So when we talk about talent development conversations, The push toward more frequent and less formal conversations is important. Very important is dialogue. And again, as I stated earlier, putting the employer in the driver's seat of the conversation, and then using the documentation, properly crafted documentation that's focused on talent development to further the conversations and keep a written record of it. So now we're seeing people push toward this new type of conversation. It takes place a couple of times a year, and it's driven by the employee. And there's over the shoulder coaching that's taking place throughout that development period between the employee and their supervisor. So by having the employee drive the conversation, what you're doing is empowering them to actively manage their role within your plant and for their career. This ownership helps to foster vulnerability on the part of the employee, which in turn creates a more meaningful dialogue between the employee and supervisor, because the employee feels more comfortable talking to the supervisor about all types of subjects as it relates to their work. Documentation of the conversation serves as a visual tool for both the employee and the supervisor to refer back to when working on further development. So recently, I was part of a talent development meeting where the employee felt safe and connected to her supervisor and to me enough that she became very vulnerable and opened up about challenges she has with being a leader within that team. That vulnerability helped foster a conversation between her and her supervisor, and the result was very open and honest discussion, and it left her with reassurance and ideas that will continue the discussion and hence move her development forward. So Danielle, I wanted to see if you could comment on the use of talent development meetings in your role as a supervisor and some of the experiences you've had with other supervisors and how it's been different for you from a traditional rating system that you have used in the past.
Sure. I mean, I think not only for me personally, but also for the clients that we're working with in the industry who are using this model, you know, I think that the greatest benefit is that it takes so much work off the supervisor, right? So even as Kenny was sharing, you know, the challenges that he has, I know many of you can certainly relate to of how do I drive it forward? Well, the onus then comes on us as a supervisor. So many of you have been in a scenario where you're trying to prepare the form, you spend hours and hours doing it, you're trying to make sure that people feel better walking out than they did when they come in, whereas in this scenario, we focus on what matters most. And the employee gets to set the tone by saying, this is what matters most to me right now. And that can change. You know, the other challenge is keeping it fresh. For those of you who have very low turnover, you know, it's hard if you're doing this once or twice a year to not feel like you're having the same conversation or typing the same thing in the boxes or saying the same thing in the meetings. You know, just keep doing what you're doing. By flipping this around, where the model is the employee then is going to set the tone, you know, is going to fill in the content, which Bart, I know you're going to show here in a minute. Instead, it allows me to respond as the supervisor to what matters most to them. I'm still going to be able to address performance concerns and challenges. So this isn't negating the need for us to do that if there are, in fact, performance challenges that we need to be documenting. But we don't want to build a system around the handful of challenges that we have. We want to build it for the great performers. And so this model really frees me up as the supervisor to just engage with what matters most to the employee, especially if I've done my job to give them that good feedback all along. You know, when it becomes an issue is if I haven't given that feedback and I feel like, ooh, now's the review. So now's the time when it's going to be an event and I need to, you know, drop some knowledge on them on what they need to do to improve. That's not really fair to the employee, right? So as you mentioned earlier, the no surprises model. But assuming that things are going well, assuming that I've done my job and I've communicated that feedback, this kind of conversation is so much fun. It's so much easier. It takes so much less time for me to prepare for because I really get to just respond to what's going to matter most to that employee. And we're hearing really similar feedback with the plants that have already instituted this as well.
Great, thanks, Danielle. So the talent development meeting is part of your performance management system. Performance management systems for your plant can start with something as simple as the talent development meeting form. There's obviously softwares that are out there that people can look at, but if you're ready to make the move to a different kind of performance management that includes talent development meetings, the talent development meeting form would be the basis for that. It really creates ease of use for your employees and supervisors to comment and record information in a formal document about their ongoing efforts to develop and support excellence and address growth areas. So this slide is actually an example of a talent development meeting form that we are working on with an Ethanol client of ours. It shows, it's a comprehensive tool that allows for goal development, feedback, and the talent development documentation puts all of that in one location. It really explores the employee's activities over that designated period of time by having them and their supervisor comment on such areas as action items from a previous talent development period, successes and challenges that the employees had from that previous period, steps that the employee can take for improvement in certain areas, and an update on the progress of goals that the employee has. So it's set up in such a way that the employee can put their comments in there and pass it to their supervisor prior to the scheduled meeting, and let the supervisor put some comments in, and then they discuss it in the meeting, and they have it for ongoing coaching and as a formal record of that meeting. So again, being an employee-driven process, this form then serves as the agenda for the talent development meeting, and it helps to promote flexibility in the discussion because it's less prescribed than a traditional review form, and these topics are open to further discussion. It's not just the comments that have been written by the employee and the supervisor. Those are there to spark that further discussion and how that employee grows and helps the goals of the plant that you have. So Becky, on the next slide, if you would. That form was developed over or through the performance expectations that that organization has. And so as we worked with that organization, we came up with performance expectations that the employee can use to look at the various areas of the talent development meeting form and make sure that they're answering questions as it applies to the expectations that the plant has for productivity, performance, and quality. So really what this does, this serves as a way to tell your employees, this is what good looks like. So then the third area I want to talk about today is well-crafted questions. Some talent development meeting forms use a question bank that allows the employee and the supervisor to select questions ahead of the meeting, place them in the document so that the employee can answer questions that they've chosen that they find important, and the supervisor can have the employee answer questions that they're curious to get some information back on. So some examples of questions for talent development meeting forms are right here. The focus on these questions are usually culture, job activities, strengths identification, and career growth on this page. And on the next page, it's a continuation. Growth through discussion of missed opportunities, identifying dissatisfaction in the employee's work, continuous learning for improvement, and then an inquiry into how the company is responding to the employee's needs. So these are examples of questions that can be used in a question bank. You can really work with this and focus on the things that are important to your specific plant and your roadmap for success and put those in there so that you're not only growing the employees, but you're getting feedback on a timely basis for the development and success of your roadmap. So this last slide is really another great part of the talent development meeting form, in that the supervisor has the opportunity at the last part of the form to just put in general comments of what they're seeing from that person, successes that they're having, any challenge that they want to put toward them over the next talent development period. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Danielle for some question and answer.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I just think as we look at these key and foundational components to a high performance culture, right? You need to have successful communication. You've got to have good training and coaching. You have to make sure that there's going to be impactful performance management. You know, you have the flexibility and creativity to build it based on your culture and what you need, but all of those should really be there and interwoven through any of them. So even if you took just one piece from our time together today, I hope you'll practice, whether it's delivering feedback in a different way, if it's listening to people through a different lens, if it's really looking to shake up your performance management process. You know, all of them are certainly going to help you to drive results and ultimately improve that culture that we know is going to be so important. So we're excited to answer any of your questions about anything that we've talked about today or anything else that might be on your mind as we're getting into this next section. Lisa, have any come through?
Yes, we do have a few questions. Thank you again to Danielle, Bart, and Vicki, as well as Kenny for volunteering to do that live coaching during today's webinar. So we will get started on some of the questions here. First, how do you know when you should terminate someone versus give them more chances to improve?
That's a great one. And I think I'll take this one, guys, and then I'll, move some over, Vicki, to you and Bart, and let you add on to this if you have anything to add. I think first is, again, looking at that attitude versus aptitude issue and really challenging ourselves to make sure that we've done a few things. The first of which is, have we been honest and clearly communicated that feedback to where the employee knows that there's been an issue? I think individuals who are uncomfortable giving feedback because they're nervous about conflict, which is normal, will sometimes do that old sandwich method that we were taught in management a long time ago, where we say something nice, and then we say something constructive, and then we say something nice. Well, depending on the employee, many of them will walk away feeling like, man, 2 out of 3, I'm doing great. Whereas the supervisor might feel like they really delivered a hard message. And far too often there's a gap there, like I mentioned before, in what the perceived message was versus the intended message. So first and foremost, if the employee has in fact, you've communicated effectively, they understand the severity of the circumstance, and you've really created that crossroads for them, and they still are not changing their behavior, that's when I would say it's probably time to part ways and move toward termination. The other thing, as I mentioned before, if it's a poor attitude, if they're bringing other people down, if they just have a negative outlook, obviously there's all the, we live in a scary world. If you've got concerns about, their impact in the organization from violence or drugs or alcohol, I mean, those are pretty obvious. But usually when the leaders we're consulting with are struggling with these decisions, those are the kinds of questions that we're asking ourselves. Vicki or Bart, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you're spot on. And oh, sorry, Bart.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to add that you go first, Vicki.
Thank you. I was just going to say, just to add on to what you said about attitude, Danielle, back in my days when I was in recruiting, I used to tell hiring managers, we can train for a lot of things, but we cannot train attitude. And so if somebody is just super negative, they're poisoning the well, it's better to remove that altogether. Go ahead, Bart.
What I wanted to add is that a supervisor should be looking at that person and visiting with them frequently on expectations, and if there are areas that they're deficient in, they should be setting plans ahead for how they're going to improve that and over a certain time period, so that if you get to a point of not knowing whether you should let them go or keep them, you have a way of looking back over a period of time and go, this conversation started 6 months ago. We've had 3 conversations. This area has improved. This area continues to be deficient, and that will help you better make that decision.
Yeah, it's, as you're saying that, it's so true. As a person who, works with clients and we do terminate people, what I tend to find is, especially when it's been a long-term challenge, and usually it is, people are so relieved after they've done it, and they just think of the emotional tax that they've been paying, and they think, gosh, I just wish I would have done this a whole lot sooner, when it is that much of a challenge. What else? Other questions?
Great, thank you. Yes, we do have a few more. How are your services structured? Can a manager just purchase a coaching training session? And if so, what would the price tag look like on that?
Great question. Who wants to take that, or guys, do you want me to?
I'll let
ahead,
you,
Danielle.
Yep.
Okay, so it really depends. So normally we always want to start first, like I mentioned, when I showed that wheel at the beginning of that slide, where first and foremost, we want to make sure that you have really clear goals in mind. And so if you don't, then first we want to help you to structure your goals so there's a clear strategic plan. Because if we come in and do coaching for you right off the bat, then ultimately that coaching is going to be a band-aid to potentially a deeper challenge, right? So if we're coaching a performance challenge, or we're coaching a leader who wants to grow, but the organization isn't ready for that growth, then ultimately that is not a wise investment of your dollars. So that's the first thing that we always want to make sure. So long you have clear goals and a clear vision of what you're up to, then at that point, yes, we absolutely will work individually, providing coaching. Sometimes it's for 3 to 6 months. We have a team of professionals that are certified through the International Coaching Federation. So there can be a lot of hogwash in the coaching profession. They can bring a lot of woo-woo, but we really want to make sure that we're focused on business performance and individual performance. So typically, an engagement is going to last 3 to 6 months. Sometimes it's going to be longer than that. Vicki had her own coaching practice before I wooed her to the firm, and so sometimes it's going to be a bit longer. But usually for coaching, we're either coaching through a challenge or transition, or coaching toward a particular goal. So it would depend. Pricing on that really does depend on how many people we're coaching. Is it virtually, or if it's going to be in person? And of course, are we pairing coaching with training? I would say that's one of the key differences in the training offerings that we do. Everybody on the call has been to a training event before, where it's an event. It's just that you go, it's a lot of rah, rah, rah. There's some great information, and then you get back to the minutia of your world. And I think that it can be so frustrating when that's the case. Whereas anytime we're doing training, we're going to pair either group or individual coaching to go along with that for at least 3 sessions, in order for people to be able to practice what they've learned. Because it's one thing to sit in a classroom or in a webinar. It's another thing to say, okay, I tried this with this employee. It failed miserably, or I found some great success. What's next? So I would say that is a significant difference for us in the way that we're going to price. But generally speaking, it's about a relationship and an ongoing engagement. But yes, you can hire us for coaching, you can hire us for training, you can hire us for some strategic direction, and pricing on how we're going to do that is really going to depend on the need. I'm not trying to avoid the question. Generally speaking, a good guideline, if you're looking at coaching only, is probably about $350 a session. That includes the pre and post work to go along with that. And is usually going to include some behavioral tools or assessments as well when we look at a ballpark. And then training, it just totally depends. I couldn't even quote you a price without knowing more about what the team would need. But call me, I'd love to talk more and listen to what we can help you with.
Excellent, thank you. Next question. How do you recommend we make compensation decisions like raises or bonuses if we don't have a rating tied to their review?
Oh, I love that question. Bart or Vicki, because I don't want to be a hog, I'm going to let you take a stab at it, and then I'll chime in. But this is one of the most common questions that we get, and I love it.
I love your passion around it, Danielle, so I'm just going to let you run with it.
Oh, whatever. Okay, you all can tell that I like words. So what's funny is that what happens now, for a lot of the plans we talk to, because they have that numerical rating, and then there's going to be an average score, and based on whatever that range is, that is going to contribute to whatever their percentage increase or bonus is. What I would tell you is it's already subjective, because so many supervisors are manipulating those ratings in order to try to give the compensation recommendations that they really want to give in the beginning. So what I would say is, uncouple the talent development portion from the compensation portion. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can certainly look at overall performance, obviously, and goals that you have of the plant. You can look at individual goals and performance of the individual, and tie bonus and performance to that. That's usually what I recommend. But I would say it's already a subjective process. It just depends on, the subjectivity now as opposed to just saying what the number is. It's really just affecting what the rating was. But lots of times you already have the tail wagging the dog if that's the system that you're going to be using.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What type of leadership supervisor classes do you recommend?
Okay, I really am going to stop talking
I'll
now.
jump in.
So you want to take that
Okay,
one?
I'm going to jump in and take this one. Yeah, thanks. So one of the ones that we really love training and find really effective, and we're all certified in, is the Franklin Covey 6 Critical Practices for Leading a Team. We're actually working with a client now, and I'm super excited about this because it's so fun to create and to partner with them and to help solve their problems, where they have a group of supervisors. The business has been around for a long time. They have a group of supervisors who've kind of come up through the ranks, but they've never had any formal training. And so they also have a group of really young up-and-comers who aren't officially supervising anybody yet, but these are high potentials, much like Kenny said that he faces the struggle of losing high potentials because there's lots of opportunity around them. Same sort of thing here. These are high potentials that they want to grow into leaders, and they're concerned about losing them. They want to invest in them and prepare them to move into those leadership roles. So we're working with both groups, creating both a leadership academy and a leadership development course for the up-and-comers. And we're actually using 6 critical practices because it's fantastic for giving the basics of how to be a good supervisor, right? What are these practices you should put into place that will once they learn these, it automatically takes their game to the next level. And that's, again, through Covey, which has fantastic content, and we're all certified in. We've also got some terrific courses that we love to teach around conflict management. We also do, as Danielle mentioned earlier, DISC, and also we can do Strengths Finder, which are all about helping people understand one another's strengths, including the employees. So when you understand your employee's DISC profile, it helps you to adjust your communication so that they can hear you better and vice versa. So those are a few that I would recommend and I get really excited about. Bart, would you add any others to that?
No, but I will say the 6 critical practices class I just love because it is a simple message in the various practices, but it's so powerful when they're all put together, and the way it's delivered engages people to have conversations, so it becomes a very experiential event.
One of the things that we're going to be offering later this fall, and if any of you are interested, you can reach out, is a day-and-a-half long training program that's actually that 6 critical practices for a day and then a half a day leading with your strengths based on Strengths Finder. And we're going to do one in California and one in Salina, Kansas. And then with it, it involves some small group coaching for 3 sessions after that. We talked about that before. And so if you're interested in that, check our website. I don't think there's information up just yet, but you can email us and we'll get you the dates and pricing information. It's pretty inexpensive. I think it's about $1,200 per person. And then I think it's $800 for additional folks to be able to attend. But so many people want to have that leadership academy potentially to offer, but internally may not have the budget to do that. So we want to be able to provide some of these offerings for people to be able to attend. I think anything with communication is going to be fantastic. The other thing is for your up and coming leaders is to have some business acumen training. Making sure that people, especially who want to step into leadership, have an understanding of how you make money. We do a lot of partnering with our internal accountants. Bart, Vicki, and I are not accountants. We are grateful for them, but we're surrounded by them since Keiko Eisen was initially an accounting firm. So really bringing a lot of that business acumen, I think, can also be really powerful. But the list is long for the different trainings that we would recommend. Something is better than nothing. So even if it's people listening into webinars, right? Even if it's taking what you heard today, and as Vicki mentioned earlier, even just in 10-minute sections in a lineup meeting, at a pre-shift meeting, of one time with your leaders talking about the SBI model for feedback, the next is walking through the GROW model. I mean, just those little incremental pieces can make a big difference, and it's not going to severely impact your bottom line.
Great, thank you. Really good questions coming in. I have one more. This one is a specific question targeted at a specific problem. So I'm eager to hear what the three of you have for an answer to this one. We have two employees who just don't get along with each other. Other than their constant arguing, they're both really good. How would you recommend I talk to them about that issue?
Conflict is the heart of everything. Vicki and Bart, you want to start?
I mean, I definitely think that you can have the one-on-one conversation using the SBI model, talk about the situation, talk about the behavior you've observed, talk about the impact that it's having. I think you could even do that with them together and get at the heart of what's happening. I think those are, using that simple model, either individually or with them together, is a good start. What else would you add, Danielle or Bart?
I think those models are good. I think making sure that they know the importance of having communication with each other to uncover what's going on and how do they move forward, so that it's not, we just want to address this problem. We want to address this problem, but we want constant communication so that we start to mitigate the chance of this problem occurring again.
It's funny, I was with one of our plants and this very issue is coming up, that we were talking about something really similar. I think starting with what you don't do. What you don't do is bring them both in and say, man, we really have a problem. We need to get to the bottom of this, because that's going to have people just really shut down. I think it can be, I think the goal of any time you're trying to mediate conflict is to try to find a win-win solution. And a win-win solution doesn't mean that everybody's happy, but instead that there can be agreement, an alignment of what people can live with. And so I think really trying to engage people in some listening is always going to be really important. So in that scenario, assuming I've interviewed both of those employees one-on-one, gotten the sense that it really is, this is just an oil and water kind of an issue, as opposed to anything, there's harassment or threats or any of those that escalated. It's really just to the point where they just work each other's nerves on end. I think it's really just first just listening, but then really trying to propel toward action. And so asking questions like, if it's, let's say the scenario is between Vicki and Bart. Vicki, if you could name two things that you would ask for Bart to stop doing or to start doing, what would they be? Because it's probably, communication style, or they're not picking up after themselves, or, they're not setting up the next shift for success. That was the issue at the plant that I was with before. They just were not doing things correctly. And so it was just constantly frustrating. So just getting really clear on what action you're asking the other person to take, as opposed to getting stuck in the emotion, is really important. Always make sure that you're ending with those actions, and then also to ensure that there can be commitment for both people to say, yes, I'm willing to do that. And then I would say get out of the way and trust that they're going to do so. If it's not better, then sometimes you're working toward discipline or some clarity on what's going to happen if they aren't able to move forward. But I think the trickiest part is when nobody's breaking a policy, they're just being a pain in the ass to each other, knowing the right thing to do. But I think focusing more on what you are asking them to do, as opposed to what they shouldn't do, is always going to be a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Danielle. And I have a follow-up to that. Does CAECO offer guidance on mediation tactics if it would come to that between two employees who aren't getting along on the job?
We do. Yeah, we do. And we spend a lot of time with family businesses, which, always brings an extra wrinkle of complication. But yeah, that is something that we help with.
Great. Okay, well, that's the end of our questions. Thank you again to Danielle, to Bart, to Vicki, and a big thank you to our volunteer, Kenny Wirtz. A special thank you to today's sponsor, CAECO ISOM. And we have an early bird exclusive discount to the upcoming International Fuel Ethanol Workshop and Expo. Call the number on your screen, mention FEW 200, and you'll get $200 off that full conference registration. A few other upcoming events, of course, the FEW, June 10th through 12th, coming up in Indianapolis. We hope to see you all there. We have 2 pre-conference seminars for that event this year, our traditional Ethanol 101 on June 10th, and a new ethanol plant construction and project summit that we are introducing this year. That'll also be taking place on June 10th. Also, the UAS Summit and Expo coming up in August in Grand Forks. That's the 27th and the 28th. And in November, also in Grand Forks, the North Dakota Energy Conference and Expo, and that's the 13th through the 14th of November. Another big thank you again to Keiko Isom for sponsoring today, to all of our speakers and our volunteer, and of course to all of our webinar attendees who called in to listen. Thank you so much and have a great day.